Hey everyone, welcome back to my tutorials on MagicQ. So today I'm going to continue my tutorials related to the tracking in MagicQ, a theater tracking in MagicQ. And I'm really sorry this tutorial might be long, about probably 20 minutes long, but I'm redoing it, so I'm really annoyed. The first time I recorded, I actually didn't record the sound. So if this time again I'm not recording the sound, I'll be really pissed off with me. But I hope I did. I'm recording everything. Cool. So let's start again. If you open the MagicQ manual, again, some of you don't like doing this, but I will be now telling you in every tutorial where to look at and how to look at. I'll try to not forget about it. Basically, if you type in the tracking in your manual, it will search for you. And on the page, on one of the pages, you'll find the one that says programming mode. So what is the programming mode? So when you creating a new show file in MagicQ, the software asks you, would you like to run as a normal live, theater non-tracking, theater tracking, hog to warp, or now it also offers you to load your own settings. So this is what I'm talking about. So today I will be talking about recording in a tracking mode and the difference between that and a normal mode when it comes to the theater tracking. Okay, so if you look at the programming mode, when you look at this particular page in a manual, it basically shows you about some of the settings in the menu that you should be aware of that are different depending on which mode you select. So normal mode, this is the normal mode we select, and the programmer tracking says no in a normal mode, same as a non-tracking. But in the theater tracking, it actually says yes. And some people actually don't know the difference because they do not read the manual. So without further ado, let's go and look into the tracking. So first of all, where to switch it on. So if you're running now in a live mode, you have the encoder B. I already said this is theater, but if you click here and you say change programmer mode, select as theater tracking. Okay, it will change some of the settings there, and I told you where to look in the manual. It basically will explain to you the differences, and while I will be showing you how it works, I will also point out to some of the differences between the theater tracking and non-tracking when you're recording QStack. Okay, so let's start with a basic example. So if I select my group of spots, I'll press add full. When you in the theater tracking mode, when you set an intensity, it also opens the intensity window. Just to show you what is running in the programmer, you have your intensity channels as well per your fixtures. But if you don't need this, just press close. It close it. So then let's set a color and let's set a position. We're gonna press record and we're gonna click here to record the first step. In the second step, I'm going to click a new position and a new color, and I press record here. So I recorded 2 steps. Then, as usual, I'll just press clear. But as I showed you in my previous, I mentioned in the previous email, in the previous tutorial, when you press clear, you're only clearing the programmer, but you're not saying to the MagicQ that this is the new data. But again, we'll come to this in a moment. So now, if I select R2 washes, and I press add full, again close that window. I press the blue color and I will press record, and I'll click here. So I recorded the 3rd step, and in the last step all I'm gonna do is I'll press position and I'll use just the tilt channel to position the fixtures down. Okay, so now I'll press record and I will click here to record that step as well. So now I'll press clear and let's run our playback and let's see what's the difference. So one of the things you will notice straight away, when you select multiple groups, by default in the theater tracking, it actually allows you to select multiple groups without using the shift button. Again, this is just a setting in the menu. Press locate, clear. Okay, let's run the queue stack. So first of all, that you're going to see, if you double click my playback or sequence that I've created, you will notice that it creates a queue stack instead of a chase to start with by default. So here you don't need to press queue timing because it comes automatically in the theater tracking mode. Another thing you have to point out that by default the fade time in the theater tracking that applies to all queues created in that mode is 3 seconds. So 3 seconds comes automatically. If you want to change those timings, of course you can manually change them, or like I showed you in a separate tutorial about fade in, fade out times, if you go to the view options and the view defaults, step times, you can set your default times here. Yeah, so if you change them to say 5 seconds by default, that means all the queues that will be created from starting from this moment will have the timing that you've set here. This is your default times. Another thing I'll point out that by default the tracking column sets as HLF by default, and that means that the HTP values, meaning the intensity dimmer values, LTP values, meaning all the other parameters except for dimmer, plus the effects parameters are going to be transferred from one queue to another. And this is by default in the theater. And I will explain to you how this differs from the normal standard tracking. And now another thing you will notice that when I raise my fader, it does not automatically activate the queue stack. Again, it's only setting here in the view options, fader, activate stack and release stack. You have to set to no, but this comes by default in the theater tracking, theater recording. If you want to set it like as you get used to, you can always set it to yes, and it will work like as normally does in the normal mode. Another thing, let's test it actually. So we'll launch the queue stack, we raise the fader to the certain level and I press go, and you have a first step. Now I press go and I have a second step. So far so good. It's exactly as we've seen when we've created the queue stack. Then you remember what we did after. We press clear. So that means we just clear the programmer. But in a theater tracking, the desk, and especially because it says tracking here HLF, because I never specified in a third step that I put those fixtures to 0, the intensity to 0, that means the information is actually tracked through. So, and then you press go and you can see all the data is tracked through. So right now you see the final result of our work where all the tracking is actually gone through the whole lot. So what will happen if I switch off the tracking to actually see what's going on between the steps? So I will select all the column, the whole tracking column, and I'll press enter to actually set it as there's no tracking. So I will release the queue stack, I will launch, I will raise my fader again, and I'll press go. Okay, we see the first step again. So far so good, yeah, because this was actually our fixtures with full intensity, all in red, and then they are in this position. Then I press go and they go to the new position, and hold on a second, so why the fixtures are actually turned off? A lot of you will ask, and I will explain to you what's happening. So I created if I press release, we'll come back to this in a second, I'll just sidetrack it for a second here. So I've created the very same queue stack here. Similar queue stack, okay. So first queue is here, I press second, I press third queue, and I press fourth queue. So if I'll select again HLF, so my bad, I will restart it again. This is what I've created in a magic queue in a normal mode when it was recording as normal. So I have the first queue, second queue, third queue, fourth queue, and fifth queue. So what's the difference? You can see when I'm on the step number 5, I can see all my cues actually, each of them were individually switched on, each group of the lights. Now in the end I can see all 5 groups to be turned on, and this looks awful. So why? Because by default I switched on them now, tracking information through. So all the information is going through. So, and then normally in a live normal mode, you would prefer to, you actually expected to see all these steps separately. And you say, right, okay, I can select the whole track column, press enter. Sorry, I'll select the whole track column, press enter. Now it's no tracking. I'll release it. I'll run my cue stack again. First step, I press go. The first cue goes out. Second cue is in. I press go. Third cue in. Second go out. So, and there's no information tracked through, and I can see everything as I saw it. And that was simply created by selecting group, setting intensity, and putting the positions and stuff. Why? Because when I was recording it, even if I press clear, the Magic Cue was recording everything from the programmer. So, but here how it looks in the cue stack created in the theater tracking. So let's look inside of each cue. So if you press view tracking, sorry, if you press here, double click, yeah, you press view cue, and you look here. So this is our first cue information. You remember we said dimming intensity at full? You don't need to remember, I will switch it on for you. So this is my first cue. Dimming intensity at full, position, color been set. Then you press go, and it goes to the second cue, and you can see that, hold on a second, so why the information is actually disappeared from our view. And I can tell you why. Because if you look here, I have the tracking switched off. So, sorry. Sorry, I've been playing here with the data information, but basically the information here is being tracked through. This is the view tracking information. So if I press view tracking, it should show you what data is being going through. So if I go again to the next cue, so this is the second cue, sorry, this is the actually second cue. So again, sorry, my bad. So this is second cue, and this is the information about second cue. So as of right now, we can see we actually turned off the tracking, yeah? If I look here, I do not see the dimming information. Why I do not see the dimming information? Because the dimming information has not been recorded when I created this cue stack. Because all I did, I only changed the position and color information, and this is the changes that's been saved. Again, let's go to the next cue. So I go to the cue number 3, and I press go, and you can see the information about fixtures to be in blue. Blue is here, correct. Dimming is here, correct. Now I press go, and I go to the next cue, and all I see is only the tilt information is here. Why? Because you remember I only brought changes to the tilt channel. This is how the Magic Cue records everything in a tracking mode. So if I go back and I switch on the tracking by pressing H, L, and F on my keyboard, and I press enter, now the whole cue stack has been tracked through. Now I'll launch my first cue, and it shows me the first step. Let's open the view cue again. Sorry. Yeah, all the information in. Now if I press go, I can see, and I go to the next cue, I can actually see my lights looking at the new position, yellow. This is exactly as you remember. But here's this button here called View Tracking. So if you click on it, you will be able to see that this information, this dimmer, is actually tracked through from the previous step. Because I have never made any changes to this particular attribute. That's why it's just tracked through. Okay, let's go to the next step. So we press next step. and we go look at the next queue again. And here again, you can see the information that it shows me that the Rogue R2 washers have got this particular information in red. That is the hard values. That means I've saved them actually in the queue, if you remember. But here's the view tracking. All this information is actually coming from tracking. So if I switch off the tracking view, this is all I'm going to see. So this is catch people off guard when they're actually looking in the queue stack and they can't understand. So they see and they say, hold on a second, why these fixtures? Where they're coming from? Why they're red, yellow? And they are not here in my view queue. All you have to do is you have to view tracking information, and then you will be able to see that this data is actually going through. And again, if I go to the next step and I press go, you can see only the tilt information, it was actually a hard value, everything else is tracking. And you can see now this window is really powerful, and especially now you know where to look at to actually understand the tracking information and how it's passed through. So, and okay, you might be in this situation where you look at this picture and you're thinking, hold on a second, okay, so I can see this is the tracked information, but where this information is actually coming from which queue? Maybe you have 200 queue in your queue stack. So how to actually track down where this information is coming from? In this case, the output window is going to be your friend here. So if you look here, and if I actually go up in my settings, what you can do is normally you have different information. You can see the view values, etc. But what I would suggest you to do is if you press view queue ID, it will actually show you your fixtures that you currently see. If you don't see them and they're somewhere down below, you actually have the filter here, the encoder B. You can change it to view selected playback, meaning that playback. And this playback will indicate to you that at this right moment you have this information that console is outputting, and out of this information the tilt information for these Rogue R2 washers is coming from this playback and is coming from the queue, step number 4. But all this other information, or this top information for the Maverick MK2 spots, is coming from the playback number 2 and the step number 2. This information is coming from the step number 1. This information coming from step number 3. So now you can actually see how powerful the output window can be when you know how to use it. Then you can always see it in the view raw information to be able to actually identify what values is coming from the magic from your queues. Another thing for you to actually know, that when you're actually working with the tracking information, for some people it can be how we call it, when people use the normal live mode, it's like no nonsense mode. It's very simple, straightforward. What you see is what you get pretty much when it comes to the working with the programmer window. But in the theater tracking, it can catch people off guard because they don't sometimes understand that the way the Magic Queue actually records everything in the in a tracking. And so one of the things that this is why this video is actually takes quite a long time, because I wanted to actually show you all the things around the theater tracking mode where you can actually understand and appreciate how to find it, how to work around this, and if you like this mode you can continue working with this. So another thing that actually that some people I think will be useful for people to know is sometimes you might be in a situation where you want to record the whole look. Like for example, if let's go back to just the basic queue stack again. So we'll create 3 steps. So at full, close that window, we put the color, intensity, position here, the first step. Now let's move it to the new position, yellow color. But now we know if I'm going to record it now, and then later on I may not want to use the tracking information, we all clearly know that the dimming information will not be stored. We clearly know, and we can always press the programmer window, and if you look at the programmer window now, you're going to see that everything in red is the values in the programmer that will be stored if you press record. But everything in the purple is actually the data is the programmer is not looking at, because this information is tracked through from the first queue. So what can you do? How can you actually get this information stored now into the next step? There's several ways to do it, and one of the ways I actually will show you in another tutorial. But in current tutorial, I will show you you can do two things. So first of all, you can select this whole dimmer column and touch the fader, the intensity fader. That means you can actually enter this value into the programmer. Or of course you can press add full and you will get them in the programmer again. But what if you just want to store it for this particular queue, but you do not want to store it for the next queues? If you want to store just the whole programmer here, including dimmer, one of the ways you can actually do is if you hold shift button here, or you can actually press record options here, you can actually select the option says entire state. So that means it will record everything that it sees now in the programmer. Then I press record and I click here. Now I stored a second playback. So do you want to check it? Let's do it. We press clear. We run the first queue, step 1. And then if I double click, and even if I switch off the tracking and I press go, you'll see the data with the dimmer information is there because I have recorded the entire state. There are shortcuts for those of you that actually using the physical consoles, and you can use, instead of pressing record option entire state, you can actually hold the all button, press record, and that will switch on record entire state mode, and then you click on your playback and it will record it into that playback. Another way, if you want to record not just what you have in the programmer, but you also would like to record that everything that's currently running, even in the playbacks, you can record it as the snapshot. One of the shortcuts you can do if you have the physical console, you can always hold the through button and press record, and then you will be able to record it as the whole snapshot. Okay, so I think it was useful, and probably the last thing I will tell you as well is when you're working in the queue stack, one of the other options that been turned on for you by default is recalculate tracking on the jumps. So if you click on the view options of your queue stack, of this queue stack, or triple click, and if you look at advanced, it will tell you that recalculate state on jumps set as yes. What it means is following. So that means if you're running a Q1 and you remember how the Q4 will look like, yeah? So it will look like all the queues together. So because it says recalculate state on a jump, that means if I'm here and if I press step number 4, and I press go to queue, it will launch the Q4 with all recalculated steps as it should be on the step number 4. That means if you don't have recalculate on the jump, that means if you jumped on step number 4, it will only show the step number 4 information if you did not have this option switched on. But now, because you have it switched on, the magic actually calculates everything before to that particular step and switch it on as it's supposed to be. So what it means is if I jump to the step number 2, it will only load everything that it's supposed to have in the step number 2. So if I press 2 and I press go to, you're gonna see that it turns off all the stuff and it switched on everything that it's supposed to be in the step number 2. Okay, so I hope it was useful for you. Again, thank you very much. Subscribe to my channel and put the likes if you want, and if you like the video, and just tune to see more tutorials coming very shortly. Thank you very much and have a good day. Bye bye.